The medicine chest sat in the parlor, between the family Bible and the writing desk. Mahogany, brass-fitted, lined in green baize. You could open it in any respectable Victorian home and find, nestled in a row of hand-labeled glass bottles, laudanum beside the smelling salts, chloroform beside the spirits of ammonia, calomel beside the peppermint water. This was not contraband. This was not hidden. This was what a responsible household kept for emergencies, for headaches, for sleepless nights, for a teething baby who would not stop screaming at 3 in the morning while the mother needed to be at the mill by 5. Every substance in that box is now either a controlled drug or a scheduled poison. In 1860, it was the family medicine cabinet, and a doctor told you to fill it. Here is what you need to understand before we go further. For most of the Victorian era, no meaningful legal distinction existed between medicine and what we now classify as a narcotic. The Pharmacy Act of 1868 was the first attempt at regulation, and even after it passed, enforcement was patchy, penalties were trivial, and cocaine was not even covered. Before 1868, anyone could sell anything to anyone. Grocers sold opium. Drapers sold arsenic. Market stallholders sold mercury compounds to mothers for their infants' gums. The General Medical Council was not established until 1858. Before that, the line between a physician and a quack was a matter of self-declaration. And the concept of addiction as a medical condition, as something that happened to your body, whether you willed it or not, did not enter British medical vocabulary until the 1870s. They were not ignorant. They were not reckless. They had no alternatives and no framework. The drugs worked, in the sense that they made the pain stop, made the baby quiet, made the cough subside. In a world without antibiotics, without modern anesthesia, without ibuprofen, a substance that produced immediate relief was effective medicine. What it did to you over months and years belonged to a category that did not yet have a name. Start with laudanum. 10% opium dissolved in alcohol. The Victorian aspirin, prescribed for headaches, menstrual cramps, coughs, diarrhea, insomnia, nervous exhaustion, and teething pain in infants. Available without prescription at any chemist in England. A penny bought a dose. A penny bought enough to kill a small child. In the Fenland region of eastern England, flat, marshy, malarial, isolated, opium consumption per capita was staggering. The registrar for the Wisbech district reported infant mortality rates far above the national average in the 1860s, with coroners linking death after death to opium-based soothing syrups. The most popular was called Godfrey's Cordial, opium, treacle, and water. A Nottingham druggist testified before a parliamentary inquiry that he sold roughly 400 gallons of it in a single year. 400 gallons from one shop in one city. You need to understand why. A working mother in an industrial town had no childcare, no maternity leave, no option to stay home without losing wages that kept her family from the workhouse. She dosed her infant with Godfrey's Cordial so the baby would sleep while she worked a 12-hour shift. This was not negligence. It was economic logic in a system that offered her nothing else. Parliament investigated. The Children's Employment Commission documented it in 1843. They knew. They recorded it. And for decades, they did almost nothing because the women were poor and the babies were poor and the pharmaceutical trade was profitable. Friedrich Engels walked the working-class districts of Manchester in the 1840s and documented penny packets of opium sold openly by druggists to the laboring poor. He saw it clearly. Self-medication as a symptom of industrial misery. The misery was the disease. The opium was the only treatment anyone could afford. Thomas de Quincey, who published his Confessions of an English Opium Eater in 1821 and revised them for a Victorian audience in 1856, described his first dose in language that reads like a conversion experience. "The pain vanished," he wrote, and that was trivial beside the immensity of what opened before him. The abyss of divine enjoyment suddenly revealed. He was a romantic, aestheticizing his own destruction. But the millions of women buying laudanum at the corner shop were not romantics. They had a toothache or a cough or a baby who would not sleep. They bought what was sold to them by people they trusted in bottles no different from the cough mixture. Now, cocaine, isolated from coca leaves in 1860, introduced into British medicine in the 1880s after Carl Koller demonstrated its use as a local anesthetic in eye surgery. But coca-based products had already arrived through tonic wines. Vin Mariani, a Bordeaux infused with coca leaves, sold internationally from 1863, endorsed by Pope Leo III himself, who awarded it a Vatican gold medal. In British chemists' shops, cocaine was sold as a toothache remedy, applied topically to numb the gums. It was an ingredient in throat lozenges. It was a stimulant tonic. Pharmaceutical advertisements in the Chemist and Druggist Trade Journal listed cocaine preparations beside cough syrups and digestive bitters. It was not covered by the Pharmacy Act. It was not restricted in Britain until 1916, not until the Defence of the Realm Act clamped down, because soldiers on leave in London's West End were buying it recreationally. For the entire Victorian period and beyond, it was legal, available, and medically endorsed. The chemist recommended it the way a modern pharmacist might suggest ibuprofen. Chloroform. James Young Simpson introduced it as a surgical anesthetic in Edinburgh in 1847. The story of its discovery is itself a dinner party story. Simpson and his colleagues sat around a table and inhaled various substances experimentally until chloroform knocked them unconscious. The practice did not stay in the laboratory. The euphoric effects were known. Chloroform was available at any chemist's shop. It was self-administered for headaches and neuralgia. And it was inhaled recreationally at social gatherings. The same substance used to render patients unconscious on the operating table, passed around a drawing room for after-dinner amusement. The Lancet warned in the 1850s that chloroform could cause sudden cardiac death without any premonitory symptom. The margin between a pleasant lightheadedness and a stopped heart was invisible. Coroner's records include deaths from self-administered chloroform, where the stated intent was medicinal. The substance did not announce its lethal dose. You breathed it in, felt a warm loosening, and either you woke up or you did not. Arsenic. This one requires you to hold two facts simultaneously. Victorian women consumed arsenic in the form of small edible wafers or in Fowler's solution, a potassium arsenite preparation prescribed by physicians, because they believed it made their skin luminously pale. And they were right. Low-dose arsenic destroys red blood cells and causes peripheral vasodilation, producing exactly the translucent, porcelain complexion that Victorian beauty standards prized. The beauty was real. You could see it, and it was the visible evidence of cumulative organ failure. Picture her at the vanity, oil lamp beside the mirror, wallpaper behind her in Scheele's green, an arsenical pigment she does not know is toxic. She swallows the wafer. Her skin glows. She does not know that the glow is the color of her own slow dying. The Bradford sweets poisoning of 1858 makes the danger concrete. A confectioner named William Hardaker purchased what he believed was plaster of Paris, called daft in the trade, used to bulk out cheap sweets. His supplier's lodger sold him arsenic trioxide by mistake. Hardacre mixed it into humbugs and sold them from his market stall. Children reached up with their pennies. Approximately 200 people were poisoned. At least 20 died. The sweets looked identical to safe ones. The inquest recorded the chain of errors in excruciating detail. Wrong cask, wrong substance, wrong hands, wrong mouths. This single incident accelerated the push toward pharmacy regulation that produced the 1868 Act. Arsenic was so common a poison that Parliament had already passed the Arsenic Act of 1851, requiring it be mixed with soot or indigo so it could not be mistaken for sugar. Requiring this tells you everything about how often it had been mistaken for sugar. Mercury. Here the doctor is not merely complicit. The doctor is the delivery mechanism. Calomel, mercurous chloride, was among the most commonly prescribed medicines of the entire Victorian period, given as a purgative for syphilis, for liver complaints, for teething infants. Yes, mercury rubbed on the gums of babies. The consequences were known and visible. Loosened teeth, excessive salivation, neurological damage, personality changes. Doctors called it the medicine working. The symptoms of mercury poisoning looked like the symptoms of the disease it was supposedly treating. Neither the doctor nor the patient could separate the cure from the poison, because the poison's effects mimicked the illness. The phrase "mad as a hatter" entered English because hat makers using mercury nitrate in felt processing developed tremors, paranoia, personality disintegration. Occupational poisoning that everyone recognized, and simultaneously, the medical profession was dosing patients with the same element on purpose. The doctor's cure was worse than the disease. No one could see it because seeing it required a conceptual framework that did not yet exist. The hypodermic syringe. Alexander Wood of Edinburgh popularized it in the 1850s. And here is the catastrophic error that defines Victorian medicine's relationship to addiction. Physicians believed that injecting morphine directly into tissue would prevent addiction, because they theorized that the opium appetite was a property of the stomach. Bypass the stomach, bypass the craving. The logic was elegant. It was also spectacularly wrong. Injected morphine created faster, more intense dependency. And the patients receiving these injections were disproportionately middle and upper-class women, treated by expensive physicians for neuralgia and hysteria. Working-class opium use was oral, penny packets, laudanum from the chemist. Middle-class morphine addiction was iatrogenic, caused by doctors who believed they were helping. By the 1870s, medical journals were documenting morphinism as a recognized condition, and the profession was quietly grappling with what it had done. They had invented a new and more efficient form of the problem they thought they were solving. Think about that. The needle was supposed to be the cure for opium addiction. It became the most efficient delivery system for a worse one. Patent medicines delivered all of these substances to the general public in bottles with reassuring names. Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup, marketed specifically for teething infants, contained morphine. Dr. J. Collis Brown's chlorodyne, advertised in the Times as the most certain remedy for coughs, colds, asthma, consumption, neuralgia, and rheumatism, contained chloroform, morphine, and cannabis tincture in a single preparation. Over the counter. No prescription, no questions, no age limit. Advertised beside pianos and domestic servants in the same newspaper column. The gap between what chlorodyne claimed to cure and what chlorodyne actually contained is the entire Victorian pharmaceutical crisis in miniature. A respectable army physician's name on the label. A newspaper of record carrying the advertisement. 3 controlled substances in 1 bottle, sold to anyone who asked. And while all of this happened, While millions of English households kept opium in the parlor and arsenic in the cosmetics drawer and cocaine at the chemist, Victorian society managed to generate a moral panic about opium dens. A handful of establishments in Limehouse, serving primarily Chinese sailors, perhaps a few dozen customers on any given night. Charles Dickens visited one for his last novel. Oscar Wilde put one in Dorian Gray. The sensationalist press screamed about racial corruption and exotic vice. The panic was racialized, exaggerated, and entirely misdirected. The real opium crisis was not in Limehouse. It was in every chemist's shop in every market town in England. The respectable druggist selling Godfrey's cordial to the Fenland mother. The physician prescribing laudanum drops for the factory owner's wife. The market stall where you could buy enough opium for a penny to quiet a baby permanently. The moral panic looked east toward a handful of Chinese immigrants, while the empire's actual opium problem sat in its own medicine cabinet. Consider the fens one more time before we finish. Flat, marshy, waterlogged, malarial. Yes, malaria was endemic to the English fenlands into the 19th century. The ague shook you with fever and chills, and the only available treatment was opium. So the mothers dosed themselves against the malaria, and they dosed their infants to sleep. And the infants sometimes did not wake, and the coroner wrote convulsions on the death record because no one investigated what the baby had been given, because no one was required to, because the substance was legal, because the mother was poor, because the system simply did not have a concept for what was happening. These women were not criminals. They were not negligent. They were doing what their chemist told them to do, what their neighbors did, what their own mothers had done. They were surviving in a landscape that offered them opium or nothing. There was no conspiracy, no cover-up, no secret underground. The substances were legal, the doctors were sincere, and the system lacked the single concept: addiction as a physiological mechanism, not a moral failing, that would have made sense of what it was doing to itself. The Victorian drug crisis was not a failure of morality. It was a failure of knowledge, compounded by a failure of imagination. The inability to conceive that what made you feel better in the moment might be what was killing you over time. You have a medicine cabinet in your home right now. Open it. Look at what is inside. Every bottle carries a label, a dosage, a warning, an expiration date, a regulatory apparatus that exists because Victorian England did not have one. Every childproof cap exists because Victorian children reached for penny bottles of laudanum on open shelves. Every controlled substance prescription exists because Victorian doctors dispensed morphine, mercury, and chloroform with sincere confidence and no accountability. The mahogany box in the parlor is gone, but the distance between trust and harm, the space where a society believes it is being healed while it is being quietly destroyed, that distance has not changed as much as you might want to believe.